Welcome back. It's time now for a look at what new films are hitting theaters this weekend. We're joined live by film critic Richard Crouse. Richard, good to see you. Happy Friday. Thanks for joining us.
Happy Friday
Let's
to
start
you.
with Cyrano. You give that one 4 stars.
I did. This is a really beautiful movie. It stars Peter Dinklage in the lead role of Cyrano de Bergerac. This is a story that's been told over and over again, both as a stage play and it's been made into a bunch of movies. This one has a different vibe to it. It's a musical. Peter Dinklage is Cyrano, and instead of having, as Cyrano de Bergerac character typically does, a long nose that makes him feel insecure and unwilling to approach the love of his life, Roxanne. Peter Dinklage is of small stature and feels insecure, will not approach her, even though they're friends, but he will not tell her his true feelings. Then she falls in love with another soldier who is inarticulate. So Cyrano says, I will write love letters for you. You use my words to woo Roxanne, and she will fall in love with you. And he is just resigned to the idea that she will never love him, but she falls in love with his words. It's a beautiful story, beautifully told. Peter Dinklage, who we all know from Game of Thrones, is tremendous in this. It's a musical, but it's not like a West Side Story musical or a traditional musical. It feels a little bit more subtle than that, a bit more nuanced from that. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. It's playing in theaters this weekend, and it's worth a look.
Okay, very good. Studio 666, you give this one 2 different ratings depending on the audience.
Well, that's right. This is the new film, well, the only film, I suppose, from Foo Fighters. So you've got the band playing themselves as the Foo Fighters, who are about to record their 10th album, but they're having trouble. They're having trouble coming up with songs. They want to do something different. The record label rents them a creepy old house in the Hollywood Hills somewhere, and they eventually find out that decades before, another band had used that same old house to try and record an album, and they were all murdered. And so now the Foo Fighters are there, and strange things start to happen, and there's a bit of devil possession, and there's lots of blood and guts and gore and goopy stuff. And, you know, I don't think that we have to be concerned about the Foo Fighters knocking off other actors from the best of acting list next year, but that's not the point of this movie. The point of this movie is to make a loving tribute to the slasher movies of the late 80s, the early 90s. It's kind of one of those movies. It's also sort of like Kiss meets the Phantom of the Park, where you get to see your favorite band play themselves in a big action movie. So I gave Studio 666, which is now in theaters, 4 stars for Foo Fighter fans, 3 stars for everybody else.
Okay, Big Gold Brick. Who's in this one?
This is Andy Garcia, and he plays someone who, by happenstance, is brought into connection with a young writer played by Emery Cohen. When Emery Cohen, who, well, Andy Garcia mows him down in his car, when he's recovering in the hospital, Andy Garcia says to him, I will pay you and you can live with me. All you have to do is write my life story, write it in the form of a novel. And that's essentially what happens. It turns out, though, that the character has had quite a life, and his family is quite a handful. So this is a movie that is often weird for the sake of being weird. It veers off into all sorts of different areas. It's kind of episodic in the nature of its storytelling, but I kind of like it because even though it swings for the fences, it doesn't quite make it all the time, at least it swings for the fences. It tries to do something a little different. So I gave Big Gold Brick, which is now on VOD, 3 out of 5 stars.
Okay, and we're staying local with the next film. It's called Scarborough. It's about Scarborough.
Yeah, this is a really lovely film that is shot to sort of resemble a documentary, even though it isn't. These are all mostly first-time actors. And it centers on 3 kids going to a daycare in a neighborhood in Scarborough. They come from various backgrounds, and they have very different kinds of life stories. One of the little girls, her father is a drug addict and a racist. Another little boy has a great home life, but in school he's bullied, and so on. And so we get to know these kids. We get to know what's happening around them. But while it sounds like it is kind of an episode of misery and that it's going to be terribly depressing, it isn't, because every frame of this movie is infused with hope. hope for the kids, hope for the future. And I defy you, once you see this, and I will not give anything away, but once you see this, you will never be able to hear the song I Want to Dance with Somebody quite the same way. And I mean that in the most positive way possible. So I gave Scarborough, which is now playing in select theaters, 4 out of 5 stars.
Very good. Looking forward to seeing that one. Okay, Richard Crouse, thanks so much for joining us again this Friday. Have a great weekend.
You too. Thanks for having me.